Looks like we're in the era of the content creator. What was once a phase, a hobby, an influencer with more steps is a cultural force. But funny enough, I think the term content creator comes from right here. What you're looking at is the YouTube dashboard, also known as YouTube Studio. But maybe that's normal. After all, when paintings were first sold, I doubt that artists loved the term painting, the most simplified description of what literally took place to make oil and canvas come together. It's the platform, the boss, the money that seems to call the shots. That's why even big businesses fund ad breaks for single-person YouTube channels. There's an existential threat. What if this isn't forever? What happens if YouTube goes away? It's a tale centuries old. Workers should control the way they work. This year has been explosive for strikes and unions hitting the mainstream, and that's no accident. It's never been more visible, more despicable, what the hands that feed will take away if given the chance. Creators are more than the packagers of content. Each channel has the ability to synthesize dozens of different professions and skills into stuff that fits into that little content section. Maybe that's why we mask away terms like artist and producer and lump everybody into the catch-all content creator. So what comes next? How do we change this system? I've heard the argument, let's make our own platform. Let's build our own video publishing and streaming service. But I think they might just call that competition, and that might be exactly what the businesses want. That feels like a drop in the pond, not a complete zeitgeist flipping moment. If we have an existential threat, call it the Vine curse, that's not gonna help. It just replaces one risk with another one.
And I feel like also I have this like Vine curse where like in my head I'm like, this is all going to go away tomorrow. I think YouTube's just going to stop.
Yeah.
And there'd be no way for me to
It'll
keep
be
doing.
destroyed by one of its competitors.
Yes, some alternatives are a good step. They shift control to a group of people who are directly involved in the work, much like a union. But I can't shake the feeling that a future like Nebula is a future we'd have to win piecemeal, one creator at a time. We need fundamental change for everyone. Systematic difference, no barrier to entry. We need a place where it's not possible for one bad actor or many to bring the whole ship down. Enter Patreon. Practically a household name, Patreon has proven that direct support is possible. But why hasn't this had deep reverberations across many industries? In fact, the entire gig contract style economy. Because it's still largely an off-site experience. As much as they would love it, Patreon has still not become popular because it's a discovery experience. It's become popular because it's where you go if you find a creator's work somewhere else and you want more from them, and hopefully to give more to them. And funny enough, just like painting, we now have a modern patron and artist system. Again, a tale centuries old. And again, one that brought masterpieces, but neglected all but the most successful. What if I told you that what comes after YouTube, after Patreon, has been foreshadowed for some 10, maybe even 20 years? Growing up in the early 2000s, there was no shortage of hype for the next big social network, just like today's absolute bankroll of AI startups in the late 90s .com boom. I remember seeing this logo in the footer of blogs and in the signature of forum posts. Diaspora. I thought this must just be another stab at virality. But it was actually something seriously different. Way back in 2010, it was like they were making promises for what we still need today. The mission, according to a blog post on their official site, was to build a new and better social web, one that's 100% owned and controlled by you and other diasporans. Yes, long before the decentralized blockchain and before crypto became synonymous with grifters, there was a seed being planted of a distributed everything. As the post continues, diaspora's distributed design is a huge part of it. Like the internet itself, diaspora isn't housed in any one place, and it's not controlled by any one entity, including us. Distributed. Even a decade ago, we started reinventing how ownership can happen on the internet. Content creation, dare I say. Today, it still feels nerdy and niche. Platforms that promise a distributed future seem like they're neglected to the corners of the internet, left behind by the other networks that are somehow now too big to fail. We've heard that before. And yet, diaspora is still active today, but it may never really break into the mainstream. And maybe that's okay, because it's already accomplished just so much. It's proved that it's possible. That somehow a non-profit social network isn't a paradox. And now we have the next generation of the distributed web. The last thing that we need to worry about is money distribution. We don't need the promises of crypto. All that crypto has served to do today is continue that painful cycle of greed. This is about art, about creation, about getting control of every step of that process. This is about the Fediverse. We are finally, somehow, seeing the fall from grace for gig services and opportunistic startups. This year alone, we've seen headlines blasting Airbnb and the fall of WeWork. Subreddits like Instacart shoppers are full of lose-lose consumer versus consumer battles and nightmares. The anti-competition lawsuit against Apple has already sent out thousands of checks towards people who didn't have choice. And it looks like Epic will owe hundreds of millions of dollars for deceiving people into buying a proprietary virtual currency for its game Fortnite. But will we always have to wait for these complex chains of events to happen for us to make progress? It's hard not to witness now the endless stream of predatory practices by big businesses and people at the very top. I would argue, no. And this video will hopefully help to paint a picture of that path forward, not just for internet creators, but for anybody that wants to work for or by themselves, without maybe a community of people that can band together and take to the streets. Yes, it does sound great to have an alternative platform or to form a union, but not everybody can, and even if you can, sometimes it feels like that can get taken away from us. That's why I'm bringing up these pain points of today, because context is important. We can't just shift from one thing to the next. We have to make major philosophical differences in how we move forward. And that might be why we haven't seen this happen yet. Because in the ideal future, the people that get the money, that get the power, are the creators, the users, the workers, and the art itself. That means not any establishment. And it's clear today that we oftentimes have the illusion of choice that keeps us going, but is paper thin. Just look at streaming services that have remade the cable packages, and look at the way we send money to each other, Venmo and Zelle. It's just still the big guys doing everything. And more importantly, it's the big guys who own everything. And no, again, this conversation is not about replacing banks. This is about stopping money from just representing stakeholder value and instead having it represent food on the table and being the fuel for beautiful, impactful projects. Money should be how we share success. After all, aren't banks enough? Aren't most gig-based companies serving as a middleman, a layer in between people that need things and those that can provide it? And today, those services are inevitably serving a board, a stock market, not us. It's those same companies that are probably fine with the term content creator and continue to use it more and more. Content, something that's packaged up and ready to profit from, a generic catch-all. But maybe we can turn the dominance of content into a stopgap, an in-between, just a moment in time. If we take action in our future, we won't be stuck in this cycle of building up and breaking down walls that hold back the things people need and the things people love. In the business world, there's a popular term for this kind of thing: silos. The hoarding and restricting of knowledge, resources, skills, keeping things apart. But what does this have to do with the title of this video, with the Fediverse, and how could I have hope for some type of distributed, federated future? What even is the Fediverse, and how does it fit into all of this? Think of the term Fediverse kind of like the cloud. It was a term that was so confusing when it first got started, but now it's ubiquitous. And most people understand the cloud is just replacing one computer with a bunch of computers. Not that crazy. And similarly, I think the Fediverse might take a while to get adopted by the average iPhone user. After all, it's not that different, replacing one big stockpile of data and ownership with a lot of it. Maybe everybody has a piece of it. After all, we desperately need this kind of thing. I mean, even speaking of iPhone users, it only took about a week for the blue bubbles that Android had with that service Beeper Mini to be shut down, much to the rejoicing of the average iPhone clicky user. The Fediverse is an agreement, a collection of places that work together. And like Diaspora, there's hardly a profit to be pocketed. The goal is to build throughways for every type of content in every kind of culture. Really, to connect all the networks into a bigger, unified picture. Seriously though, even though it sounds romantic, that's genuinely what the Fediverse represents, the promise of the federated universe. As most people who've had to explain the Fediverse say, it's just like what we already do with email. You put someone's name in, an @, and then whatever website they chose to use for email. Now, think about that, but for everything. I mean, isn't the potential clear? Doesn't it just make sense? And with enough support, we could have that kind of approach for everything. Instead of having silos of photos like Instagram, videos like TikTok, text like Twitter used to be, and even supporting people with Patreon, we can break all of that down all at once. And we'd be serving each other directly, literally. Instead of having to build alternative platforms like we already have with Nebula, we could have an infinite amount of alternatives, of real, genuine options for people to self-publish, to use things at no cost, instead of having someone in the middle or at the very top. All we would really need is a window, a way to plug into that network, to browse and interact with that content, to plug in to the Fediverse, and we wouldn't need to succumb to anyone owning or controlling anything. And that's another enormous opportunity. Not just would we have limitless types of content and avenues to create and upload things, but the way we look at it can change. We don't need to use any one web browser or one website. We wouldn't need to wait for a dark mode and a light mode. All of that would be up to us. How we interact with it, what we interact, and how we support that stuff. We can make everything. And that's my idea, my lofty dream for the future. Instead of a replacement for YouTube, a replacement for Patreon, a complete ground-up change. The Fediverse is an agreement, and we can all agree that we need a better YouTube, potentially a more direct Patreon. And if we agree, we can build it without any middleman, without even a company. All we need is a way to plug in, and people ambitious enough to put their stuff out there. The centuries-old tale could end with us. We don't have to wait for a platform to get shut down, wait for any kind of approval, wait for a like-minded group of neglected creators, of people that were not treated right. We can already see. We can finally produce and own the way we produce, and even own the way we support each other and ourselves. We deserve this.